Oh, go figure out.
Right.
Is the ark locked?
Yes.
The ark is locked. Don't worry, don't worry. We're gonna do it after Yizkor, and we'll unlock the
Yeah.
ark. Okay.
I locked it. I felt like in between services, probably shouldn't leave the ark unlocked with people coming in and out today.
We like the standing guard, so.
Good afternoon. Gomar Khatima Tova. It's good to see all of you again. We're here obviously for a serious purpose to do Yizkor. But I do actually have a practical question that I would appreciate people's feedback on in between when we finish Yizkor and when we go to Mincha, because we're not going to take an hour and 15 minutes for Yizkor. And the practical question is that I've actually never served as a rabbi on high holidays in a congregation that does Yizkor later in the day than in the morning. Like, there's no real rule about when you do Yizkor, but like most places I've served would do it in the morning. Like, you do it as a part of the morning service, and then you just come back for Mincha later in the afternoon. Some synagogues do it later in the day. Like, ACI is not the only place that's ever done this. But it was some synagogues that had a custom of moving it later, not so much because of any reason about the liturgy, but because it would, frankly, promote attendance later in the day. And I'm looking at the faces that are here right now are mostly people who are here in the morning. And I think that it's a reasonable question for people to ask, like, would you prefer going forward to keep it now or move it later? I'm actually asking out of genuine curiosity because there's no right or wrong place to do it. And so that's just a very practical question before we do the serious stuff, but it's an important one because, you know, people who want to make sure that they're there for Yizkor, you know, are very, it's extremely important for a reason, and especially if, like, for some reason you're not there when it's happening, it can, you know, it can be a big deal. So I did want to ask about that before we got started. No, I'm in between. When we're done Yizkor before Mincha, you can please feel free to come and tell me, because we all have some time between when we're done this and when Mincha takes place. So, as I mentioned, for those who are here for Kol Nidre last night, I talked about it as much this morning. Yom Kippur is very much a day where we are challenged to think about our own mortality as human beings. And given that that is a part of the day, and given that we will recite Yizkor here, I think it's actually worth taking a moment to learn a little bit about the most well-known prayer in Judaism about mortality, which is the Kaddish Yatom, otherwise known as the Mourner's Kaddish. Now, if you've ever read the English side of the page of the Mourner's Kaddish, you probably have noticed that it doesn't really have that much to do with death. And by not have that much to do with it, I mean it has nothing to do with it. It's not even mentioned. It's one of the reasons why synagogues, you know, have different relationships to how much English they use in the United States. But I have never been to a synagogue of any flavor anywhere that does the Mourner's Kaddish in English. It would almost seem completely backwards. But on a practical level, if you were saying it in English, it wouldn't make the prayer more meaningful. You actually could argue that it makes the prayer less meaningful, because people are so used to saying the Mourner's Kaddish and know the words so well that it would actually ruin the whole rhythm and cadence to this prayer. So I thought it would actually be useful to even talk about the Mourner's Kaddish and where it comes from, because it has its own fascinating history. There's a story that's told about this that involves Rabbi Akiva, who sees Mourner's Kaddish as sort of a cry for humanity, and per the Devar Torah I gave earlier today, in some ways it's also a statement that people are more than even the worst thing that they've ever done in their life. So the story goes like the following, that Rabbi Akiva is walking by a cemetery, and he saw a man who was naked, black as coal, and covered in thorns. Rabbi Akiva initially thought that the man was alive, yet a young boy told him that the man was actually dead, but would have to sort of die almost again every single day, and the boy needed to chop trees to burn the man over and over again for some unspecified sin. Rabbi Akiva approaches the dead man and asks what he did while he was alive. And the man says, "I was a tax collector, and I would favor the rich and kill the poor," indicating this man lived far from a noble life. Sidebar, I happen to be the great nephew of someone who worked for the IRS for like 50 years, my Aunt Florence, because Baltimore has a big IRS office. You have to sort of contextualize that several thousand years ago, living in Rabbi Akiva's time, being a tax collector was not simply serving an important, albeit challenging, like government role that people agree, even when they don't want to, that you have to actually do. Like being a tax collector was essentially being one of the people from the government that ran the Jewish people's lives, but who were not Jewish, who would come around and take all their money. So being a tax collector was considered a very, very like poor way to go through society. And I want to say that just out of respect for anybody who at any point in their life has actually been a tax collector. My Aunt Florence would never forgive me. When Rabbi Akiva asks if this man can be redeemed, he sighs and says no. Yet after pausing for a moment, the man said he had heard a teaching that if only this poor man who had a son would stand in front of the congregation and have them answer, Yehei Shnei Rav Mevorach, he would be immediately released from his punishments. And of course, the words Yehei Shnei Rav Mevorach are the central words of the Mourner's Kaddish. In fact, the original reference to this prayer, the Mourner's Kaddish, is actually sometimes called Yehei Shnei, because these words are the center of the prayer. Rabbi Akiva sets out to find this man's only living son. Yet it turns out the son knows nothing about Judaism and is ostracized by his own community. And after much more, Rabbi Akiva teaches the son to open up and offer a prayer before God, at which point the son can recite the Kaddish and his father is redeemed from punishment. Now, I had never heard this prayer. I had never heard this story until a few years ago, and I learned about it in an article that was written by a professor at Northwestern University named David Shayevitz. And he says that the story about Rabbi Akiva searching for this man's son to redeem this person who is naked and covered in soot and like looking like he's dead, but he's actually sort of alive and he has to die and be burned every single day, is this story is a reminder about the redemptive potential in every other human being. And he says, quote, rather than functioning as a passive acknowledgement of divine omnipotence, medieval Jews understood the Kaddish to be a weapon in the Jewish liturgical arsenal, to be actively wielded by the living in service of the dead, even or especially in the case of the people that God had declared lost. In other words, this prayer, this legend, was something that was almost constructed by people as a way to say that we believe that every person who is alive or is recently departed is worthy of redemption. And we are willing to say a particular set of tefillot in order to remind even God that no one is unredeemable. And that brings us to Yizkor, because Yizkor is a prayer where the sheer number of combinations of who people are saying prayers for is enormous. No matter what the sizes of the congregation, the number of potential stories about why you're saying it and what your relationship was to that person is an endless list. Some of those relationships are fond, and they're ones that are about people you miss every single day. And sometimes those prayers you're saying are for people who are no longer in your life, and in some small way you might be relieved that they're not there anymore. We are just as equally obligated to say Yizkor for people who were in our life but caused us harm, but are a part of those relationships, as we are to say for people that were perfect and we loved very, very much. And so it's important to remember that everyone here is saying these tefillot for a different reason and for a different kind of person. But what we're all doing is we're wielding this powerful liturgical weapon, which is the words of the living on behalf of those who are no longer here, to remember the redemptive power that God has for all of us. So with that, please rise. Page 684. Adonai Madam Batedaehu Ben Enosh Vatachashavehu Adam Lahav Adama Yamav Yitzel Over Baboker Yatzis Vespalaf La'erev Yimolel Ve'avesh Tashev Enosh Ataka Vatomer Shuvu B'nei Adam Shuva Adonai Admata V'hinachem Malabadecha. We read responsibly in the English. There is a time for everything. There is a time for all things under the sun. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to laugh and a time to cry. A time to dance and a time to mourn. A time to seek and a time to lose. A time to forget and a time to remember. This day in sacred convocation, we remember those who gave us life. This day we remember those who enriched our life with love and with beauty, with kindness and compassion, with thoughtfulness and understanding. This day we renew the bonds that bind us to those who have gone the way of all the earth. As we reflect upon those whose memory moves us this day, we seek consolation and the strength and the insight born of faith. Tender as a father with his children, the Lord is merciful with his worshipers. He knows how we are fashioned. He remembers that we are dust. The days of man are as grass. He flourishes as a flower in the field. The wind passes over it and it is gone, and no one can recognize where it grew. But the Lord's compassion for his worshipers, his righteousness to children's children, remain age after age unchanging. 70 our years may number, 80 years have granted the vigor. Laden with trouble and travail, life quickly passes, it flies away. Teach us to use all of our days, O Lord, that we may attain a heart of wisdom. Grant us your love in the morning, that we may joyously sing all our days. Shiviti Adonai lenegdi tamid ki mimini ba'alemot lachen samach libi yevegagel kivodi af besari yishkol labetav. We're now going to take a few moments in silent prayer to remember those people that we love who are no longer in our lives. Passages can be found between pages 686 and 690, and we'll join together for the respective Amalei Rachamins on page 691 in a few moments. We turn to page 691 for the Amalei Rachamim in memory of the 6 million. El Malay Rachamim Shochein V'Amramim Hamsei Menucha Nechona Tachat Kanfei Ashchina B'Malo Kedoshim U'Toharim Kizar Harakia Mazirim V'Nishma Kol Acheinim B'nei Yisrael Anashim Nashim B'Tav Shenehergu V'Shenitbechu V'Shenitrufu V'Shenenechnechu V'Gan Eden Tehi Menuchatam Ana Balarachamim Hastirem B'Tzeder K'nafech Le'olamim Utzror B'Tzorachim and Ishmotehem Adonai Unachalatam V'Yanuchu V'Shalom Mishkamotehem V'Nomar Amen. Exalt, compassionate God, grant perfect peace in your sheltering presence among the holy and the pure, to the souls of all our brethren, men, women, and children of the house of Israel who were slaughtered and burned. May their memory endure, inspiring truth and loyalty in our lives. May their souls thus be bound up in the bond of life. May they rest in peace, and let us say, Amen. Now in El Malay Rachamim, in memory of all those who are departed. El Malay Rachamim Shochein V'Amramim Hamsei Menucha Nechona Tachat Kanfei Ashchina B'Malo Kedoshim U'Toharim Kizohar Harakia Mazirim and Nishmot Kol Eleh Sheyizkarnu Hayom Livracha Shalchu Le'olamam V'Gan Eden Tehi Menuchatam Ana Balarachamim Hastireh B'Tzeder K'nafecha Le'olamim Utzror B'Tzorachim and Nishmotehem Adonai Unachalatam V'Yanuchu V'Shalom Mishkabotehem V'Nomar Amen. Exalted, compassionate God, grant perfect peace among the holy and the pure in your sheltering presence, to the souls of all our beloved who have gone to their eternal home. May their memory endure as inspiration for deeds of charity and goodness in our lives. May their souls thus be bound up in the bond of life. May they rest in peace. And let us say, Amen. We read responsively on page 692, Psalm 23. I'll read a line in Hebrew, and you all will respond with a line in English. Mizmor LeDavid, Adonai Ro'i, Lo Echsar. The Lord is my shepherd. Bino Desha, Yarbitseni. He gives me repose in green meadows. Almei Menuchot Yinahaleni Nafshi Yeshovev. He leads me beside the still waters to revive my spirit. Yancheni the Magleit Tzedek, Laman Shemo. He guides me on the right path, for that is his nature. Gam Ki Elech Begeit Salmava Lo Irara Ki Ata Imadi. Though I walk in the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no harm, for you are with me. Shiftecha umishantecha hema yenachamuni. Your staff and your rod comfort me. Ta'aroch lefanai shochan neged sorai. You prepare a banquet for me in the presence of my foes. Dishanta v'shemen roshi kosi rivayai. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. Achto v'chesed yirdefuni, kol yemei chayai. Surely goodness and kindness shall be my portion all the days of my life. V'shavti b'beit Adonai le'orach yamim, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. We recite the Kadisha Tome, the Mourner's Kaddish, on page 694. If you'd like a transliteration of the Hebrew, it can be found on page 693. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei rabbah, v'yalman tivarach v'ruteh, v'yamlich malchuteh, v'chayechon v'yomechon v'chayedechol beit Yisrael, ha'agalah u'bizman karib v'imru amen. Yehei shmei rabbah barach le'olam u'lamei almayah. Yitbarach, Yishtabach, Yipa'ar, Yitromam, Yitnaseh, Yitadar, Yitaleb, Yitalal, Shmenikucha, Riku, La'ela, Minkol Birkat, La'ela, La'ela, Minkol Birkata, Bashirata, Tushbekata, Benechamata, Damiram Biama, Vimru, Amen. Yehesh Shlama Rabba Min Shmaya, V'chayim Aleinu V'al Kol Yisrael, Vimru, Amen. Moseh Shalom B'Ramav, Hu Yaseh Shalom, Aleinu V'al Kol Yisrael, Vimru, Amen. You may be seated. Mary Frances O'Connor wrote a book this past year called The Grieving Brain. And she talks about how a person going through grief is like a person getting used to something that they took totally for granted and then lost and couldn't find it. She writes, no one expects their dining room table to get stolen, and no one expects their loved one to die. Even when a person has been ill for a very long time, no one knows what it will be like to walk through the world without this other person. Grief is a heart-wrenchingly painful problem for the brain to solve, and grieving necessitates learning to live in the world with the absence of someone you love deeply, who is ingrained in your understanding of the world. This means that for the brain, your loved one is simultaneously gone and also everlasting. And you are walking through two worlds at the same time. You are navigating your life despite the fact that they have been stolen from you, a premise that makes no sense, and that is both confusing and upsetting. If this is the first year that you are reciting Yizkor on behalf of someone, anyone, for whatever reason, it is a profoundly confusing thing for our minds to get used to a world without someone. And I hope that you're finding your way through that really difficult moment. We're now going to take a break after the break. Mincha is going to be at 5:15, excuse me. Everyone, of course, is welcome to stay in here or walk around the building or leave. If you leave, just remember that Mincha will be at 5:15, Megillah will be at approximately 6:30, and Havdalah and the end of the fast will be at 7:30. Kamar Fatima Tova, and I'll see a number of you back here in a little while.